Dogworks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. You can support this podcast on patreon.com/First Paw Media.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small-batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site. You can hear all of our episodes over on dogworksradio.com. And be sure to follow us on social media. Just search for Dogworks Radio. And today is our daily coverage of the 2021 Iditarod. It is our kickoff show, and we have an interesting first show for you. We have two guests or two co-hosts. We have Alex Stein, our normal co-host, calling in from California, and we have Tony Ryder calling in from down in the Kenai area of Alaska. First off, Tony, how's it going today?
Pretty well. It's actually really nice. The snow finally stopped this afternoon, so it's a balmy, I think Dad yelled out that it was 30 degrees out just a little while ago. So
very good. Nice. Very good. And Alex, welcome back. This is our 10th year doing this together. I'm glad we're together. How's it going down in California?
It's going really well down here in California. I can't complain. It's a little bit warmer than 30 degrees. But I'm very excited. You know, I was just thinking this morning that usually this would be the ceremonial start in Anchorage, and there's all sorts of, you know, kind of traditions with the ceremonial start. I have certain things that I almost always do when I am up in Alaska for the start. So it's a little bit strange to me that we don't have that, and it almost feels like it's not really Iditarod yet.
It does, and except for all of the dog trucks heading up north past our house here in Willow today, it doesn't really feel like Iditarod in terms of the fans' sense. I know that you and Tony are huge fans of Iditarod, and we're going to jump right into this with Tony. Tony, I know that you have been following Iditarod your entire life. Your family has been involved with Iditarod from many years back, volunteering and working with kennels and friends with kennels and all that sorts of stuff. So first off, could you do a quick introduction, tell us who you are and what you're all about? And then I want to talk a little bit about volunteering for the race, especially on the ceremonial start day.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'm born and raised in Alaska, mainly in South Central, mostly Kenai area. Grew up, my family, we had dogs, sleds in the neighborhood, kennels, just recreational kennels. My best friend had a recreational team. She dumped me in the river, and you'd think that would be enough for me to say, you know what, this is dumb, but I stuck with it as a kid. And then, I'm a photographer. I photograph mainly portraits, but with my work with different kennels, I've gotten into shooting different races. I was an official photographer for the Testamina 200 for a few years, an official photographer for Mitch Seavey's kennel for a while. So just, I'm pretty normal. And then I have a blog that every once in a while I'll bring up mushing on there. So that's pretty much me.
We're going to definitely link to that blog here on the show notes page, but let's jump into the volunteer side of it. I saw something on Facebook today that said it doesn't feel quite like Iditarod. For the last 17 years, you're usually bundling up right now and heading over to one of the stops, or I guess kind of the route of the ceremonial start there at the native hospital. What is your role on a typical ceremonial start year?
Well, I have the designation of area coordinator, which is just a fancy title for I wrangle a few friends and family members together to trail guard for the, it used to be called the Tudor Crossing section of the Anchorage Trail. Now it's basically the Alaska Native Medical Center because they've kind of taken over that whole area. It used to be just a gravel area that we could all park, and now there's buildings everywhere, which makes it interesting. It keeps the wind from hitting us, so it's actually warmer now. But yeah, we're there for crowd control. We're there to answer questions, make sure the loose dogs from the University Lake Dog Park don't come into the teams. We're there, if there's a moose on the trail, we have to let people know. So it's actually one of the easier, less stressful trail guard type jobs because Anchorage is so much just that ceremonial party-like atmosphere. We have Matson, one of their sponsors. They have a booth set up in our area with free hot dogs and soda and chips and all of their different swag, which was mainly Alley Circle. So it's more party-like. We're less worried about the teams starting and stopping. They most all of them stop there. We have a crazy corner that it's not a 90-degree turn. It's more like a 70-degree turn. It's pretty wicked. And so we get a large crowd there because there's always action there. The teams, no matter how many years they've run it, no matter how often they're warned about it, they take it too fast. So there's always at least one or two spills that people are talking about for days later. But yeah, that's pretty much what we do. And my family's been there longer than I've been alive, I think. So
with the volunteering for Iditarod, in other sports, I'm thinking like weekend 5Ks and things, people just show up and volunteer, that they'll take any warm body to be a volunteer. Right. That's not necessarily true with Iditarod. You have to go to meetings, you have to fill out applications and be approved and all that. It's a pretty rigorous process, isn't it?
It feels like it. When you look on the website, it really depends on what you end up volunteering for, how much prep work and how much of an interview or an application process it is. They do want to make sure that you're able to volunteer because it is, some of the jobs are very physically demanding, either with actual strength or just the time constraints and everything like that. But for the Anchorage start, depending on what you're doing, as long as you sign up by a certain time and they have a place for you, they're always trying to boost numbers for that. I know in the last few years, even my team's been down a few just because of scheduling. But yeah, it starts off with you send in an application online, and then it's a wait and see process because they normally do the applications in October or November, and then you don't start hearing from the different coordinators until January. So you just kind of sit there and wait and hope that they pick you. And yeah, it's not, I don't know what it's like for the other jobs as far as what they require. But for the Anchorage start on the trail, it's, again, depending on where you are, it's probably one of the easier jobs physically.
It's interesting, too, because a lot of the volunteer jobs, it seems like people will start or will find a job that they really like, and then they'll just go back and do that same job year after year. Is that pretty much the case with your team there?
Yeah, I do have quite a few in the last few years, and I guess I should give a shout out to the ugly dogs already in this. But the last few years, we've had a lot of what we call rookie volunteers or puppy volunteers, where it's a great entry level volunteer position because, again, there's not a lot of stress involved. So it's just the idea of getting excited and can I be out there in the cold type idea. And then we do have some that graduate to being dog handlers at the start and the restart, or we've had them go from trail guarding with us to trail guarding in Willow, which is a little more strict because it's actually race day. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, I've got my core team that have been working that trail almost as long as my grandparents had, like Jim Gallagher and Karen Gallagher. They've been there for eons, way before I was out of diapers, and they're still helping out. Karen takes care of our coffee runs, and Jim sits there at the entrance of the dog park to where that trail meets up with the trail that the teams use, and he's the one that makes sure that dog owners keep their dogs back, and he's loved in that area. There are people that actually come back year in and year out just to hang out with Jim, which is kind of weird. And then I've got, I'm not the only third generation volunteer in our group. One of my best friends growing up, Matthew, he also volunteers every year, and he sits on that corner and is the one that if a dog team gets loose, he's the one that normally the mushers are asking, to help out, either hold the break while they get the dogs lined out or whatever. So it's kind of a family affair, even though they're not biological family. They're family we've chosen over the years, and that's kind of what our team has become. So yeah, I've got quite a nice crew that come back year in and year out, and then they branch off, and they might volunteer elsewhere in the same year, but they start off with me. So it's really nice.
All right, Alex, let's get started with our kickoff. Now that we have a really good understanding of the volunteer process, this is definitely my favorite part of the show. I love hearing what you're coming up with, your thoughts. You and I were talking off air, and this is truly an Alaskan field, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting because most years there are teams from 5 or 6 different countries represented, and this year there's a team from Norway and a team from Denmark, but both of those mushers are basically living full-time in Alaska. Then there's a couple of Canadian teams, and there's a couple of teams from Minnesota, but aside from that, it is all Alaskans. It's all people who live in Alaska, a lot of them who grew up in Alaska. So it's an interesting, this is an odd year, and it's a very different year for a lot of reasons. But it's interesting that in this year where it's such a struggle to even be able to put on a race like this, that it seems in a lot of ways to have gone back to its Alaskan roots.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that's going to be a really interesting storyline as we move forward. Alex, how many people are on the roster right now? At last thought, I thought it was 57. Is that where we stand?
47. Yeah, there's 12 rookies, 35 veterans, and 13 women and 34 men. We had a gigantic number of withdrawals. Usually there will be 5 or 6 withdrawals before the race starts, but this year we had 19.
Wow.
And for a lot of people, especially people in the lower 48, there were just a lot of difficulties in terms of transportation, getting yourself and your dogs up to Alaska, people who have their own dog teams. And so I think that was a huge part of it. And then, there were some of the teams who are based in Alaska who chose not to compete either because of personal issues, sometimes physical issues or injuries. Sometimes they felt their dog teams just weren't ready. And there were a couple of people who seemed to think that given everything and given the COVID protocols and given the difficulties that might be involved with this year's race, that it would be better to wait a year and come back and do it next year.
So for folks that are just joining us and you're not a Iditarod super fan, this is definitely a race that's different than most years. Not only are they not running from the ceremonial start in downtown Anchorage that they typically do today, and then they do the restart in Willow and then head on their way to Nome about 10 days later or so. It's an entirely different race. They're running from up here in Willow. It's almost a secluded area at Deshka Landing. I've been there many times to launch dog teams. There's not a lot of places to hang out and watch the dogs run by. And then they're on the river and on their way. And then they're going to go a little bit past the checkpoint of Iditarod to a place called Flat, and then they're going to turn around and come back. They're going to have 1 24-hour rest as normal and 2 mandatory 8-hour rests. I know Alex and I talked about that a couple of shows ago, but other than that, the format is relatively the same in terms of going down the trail with those mandatory rests and all that. But what's interesting, and I'd like to get both of your guys' perspective on this, at least I guess this is sort of our first discussion, and that is the unavailability of checkpoints. And a lot of the mushers are saying that they're prepping everything that they're doing, their sleds, their drop bags, all of that. They're prepping for mostly camping on the trail. A lot of the checkpoints are going to be away from the villages because of the COVID protocols. So they're not going to have that atmosphere that they normally have. And, we talk a lot about, the food in the checkpoints or the people in the checkpoints or the amenities in the checkpoints. That's a big part of the race, but this year it's a little bit different. So let's start off with Tony. What are your thoughts with the way that sort of laid out this year compared to all the years past?
I think it'll really help some of the older established mushers because they've done it before. I was actually watching my copy of the 1987 Iditarod just the other day. I know it's really dorky to admit that, but that's one thing that we do to prep for Iditarod every year is we just watch the old DVDs or the tapes that we have. And in between checkpoints, they were still camping even in the 80s. So you have mushers like Martin Boozer who, they're used to camping. And Martin's been actually camping in his little pup tent, even in the checkpoints for the last few years. So I think it does kind of bring it back to what the race was maybe when I was growing up or even before that, which a lot of these mushers, especially those that grew up here in Alaska, they're used to. We remember hearing about the great campouts during the race in between checkpoints. And this year it's more they're camping out at the checkpoints because the checkpoints aren't in the villages and in the towns. But I think for the most part, it shouldn't be that different. Instead of camping out on a school gymnasium floor, they're camping out on the ground near their dog, which is probably more comfortable anyway. So.
Right. Alex, what are your thoughts on this 800-mile camping trip?
I love it because it seems like it's getting back towards what the Iditarod used to be. And I know that I have an overly romanticized view of what the Iditarod used to be, but there's something really inspiring about the idea of people going out and basically being more self-sufficient like they were in the old days. And I know that there are, in most of these checkpoints that are villages that are inhabited, they are making every effort to keep the mushers away and to keep the villages and the volunteers and the mushers all kind of separate as much as possible. I did read that there was one checkpoint where they were going to put up a big tent where to offer a little bit of protection from the wind, but people could camp and sleep inside this semi-protected area that still would be away from the village. So I kind of like it. People who are fans of the history of Iditarod may know that before Joe Reddington decided that it should be a race to Nome, the original plan was to start in Anchorage, go out to the town of Iditarod, turn around and come back. Mm-hmm. So in a way, this is that race that he initially envisioned.
Yeah, and I heard Tony talking about this sort of being the old school race with some of those old timers and what they did way back with camping, and that brings up a very interesting story about one of the rookies, Dakota Schlossler. His family is in the business here in Willow of making really cool dog sleds. I have 2 of them down in my dog yard right now. It's my sled of choice. But he is running in his rookie year, and he is pulling out all the stops with his sled with this camping trip. He's pulling behind his sled a trailer that's a modified caboose that you can unfold, and my understanding is it has like a little tent. It's kind of like a camper, has a little tent with a cot and the whole 9 yards, and I believe he's going to be the one that's traveling in style, and that makes me think of a few years ago where Martin Booser, they caught a picture of him in one of the checkpoints with his pup tent that was popped up beside of his sled, and he knows what he's doing, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how some of these other guys do it as well. Let's move on to you, Alex. What are your thoughts moving forward? What's your first story that you want to mention here tonight, and then we'll move on.
I just wanted to mention briefly that Cindy Galley or Galley, I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce her last name. She was coming up from Minnesota and had a lot of problems getting across the border, and she was stuck at the Canadian border. And it's been a little bit inconsistent in terms of officially the U.S.-Canadian border is closed. Some people have been able to come across. Some people who live full-time in Alaska or own property in Alaska have had more luck being able to cross with dogs or with dog trucks. But she was stuck there for several days, and one of her friends, and I believe one of her sponsors, put out this call for people to help raise money so that she could fly her dogs to Alaska, since she realized she wasn't going to be able to drive across. So they figured that they needed about $5,000 in increased costs to fly her and all of the dogs up to Alaska. And in about, I think, 15 or 16 hours, they raised $8,000. She was able to drive from where the border in Minnesota over to Seattle, and Alaska Airlines was able to take care of her and get all of her dogs up. And Al Ishins and his kennel are providing her with a place to stay and lending her a dog truck. So it's one of those great stories that I love about how, a musher will get in trouble or not really trouble, but will need something, and the entire community will sort of rally around to help that person.
Yeah, and a very similar story with Michelle Phillips. She was having a tough time coming up. She is one of the Canadians that's running in the race, and she had a real trouble trying to get her dogs over, and it's my understanding she had to, I don't know if it was charter a plane or do something in what she calls a commercial passenger, and I think that she may have jumped on a commercial flight or something like that to get her dogs over. But it just reminds me of the tenacity to get over here to do this race. It could be really easy for either Michelle or Cindy just to say, enough's enough. I don't want to play all these political games. I'm just going to call it off this year and move forward. But it doesn't usually work out that way with Iditarod mushers, does it?
No, I think one of the great things about mushers is that they are often extremely stubborn, and that can be a bad thing in some situations. But in situations like these, or in situations where your entire race plan has sort of collapsed and you have to figure out what to do. That's a very, very helpful trait to have.
Right. So let's go back to Tony now, and I'm going to ask you, what do you see as the big story, at least in terms of your thoughts of this year's Iditarod? I'm sure we all have many, but what is your top story leading into the race and during the race itself?
Well, leading into the race is definitely Ali Zirkle coming out saying this is her final race. It brings up every emotion, I think, for most any Iditarod or mushing fan. For me personally, it was kind of out of the blue, even though we saw Alan, step aside after last year and say, I'm done racing. It never really felt like Ali was going to be right behind him. So it kind of took me for a spin, and I know that that's kind of what dominated the airwaves here in Alaska, and it's just because she's so well loved. She kind of gave off, at least to me, I don't know if it was for anybody else, but she kind of gave off that Susan Butcher vibe of just fun. You wanted to follow her. You wanted her to do well. You rallied behind her, and everyone in the state seemed to rally behind Ali. So I think no matter where she places, that's probably going to be the dominant story for most of the race. I think to be the going down and then coming back and going up the Dalzell Gorge, that's the story I'm kind of looking forward to, because I just want to see what happens. I feel like the Yukon Quest mushers might have an advantage because they are used to running up those difficult mountains and hills at the end of a race, and so I think that might play a part. I'm not sure, not being a musher myself and not really knowing that area, but I know just how technical everyone says that part of the race is, and whether or not that river is going to hold up with the ice bridges or not.
Right. Alex, what is your top story moving forward?
I would have to agree with the Ali story. And also, I think that we're going to be hearing a lot about Dallas Seavey. This is his first year back after being away for a few years since the doping scandal, which he got an official apology for. He wanted changes in the ITC board, and a lot of that has happened, and there's a new person running the Iditarod and the ITC. So I think a lot of us are going to be very curious to see, is Dallas going to be able to pull it off this year? Certainly has a lot of advantages. He's an amazing musher, a really great strategist, and he's going to be running a team that is made up of the best dogs from his kennel and from his dad Mitch's kennel. So I think that is, a lot of people are going to be looking to see, how he's going to do after being away from Iditarod for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all of those stories were right there on my top list for sure. And I know that you and I have talked about this one as well, Alex, the story with Larry Doherty and what he's doing. I don't know if it's more of an awareness campaign or an actual public health story where he's trying to get those vaccines down the trail and to the villages. Anyway, whether it's PR or public health, I think it's a really cool story that he's doing, and I'm sure it will bring a lot of press. I agree with you, Alex, with Dallas. I've been following him on Facebook the last couple of weeks, and he's gotten very Facebook and Twitter savvy very quickly in the last few days. He's following Ali Zirkle's lead in terms of the amount of stories he's putting out and all of that. And I really like to see that. He's always been very active on social media, but it seems to be he's doing it a little bit different this year. Tony, I know that you're a big follower on social media, especially on Facebook and Twitter. Do you get that same vibe with Dallas this year? It's a little bit different, isn't it?
It's a little bit different. I think he has different people helping him out with his Facebook and his social media in general. I've noticed a lot more emojis being used.
Yes.
And that doesn't feel like it's him. So I kind of sit there going, okay, if there's a lot of emojis, maybe that's not Dallas. Or maybe he's embraced emoji speak. I don't know. But, it's always really interesting to see when different mushers are most active on their social media. Dallas, typically, if he's not racing, he'll put a few things up during the year. But even in the years that he was running in Norway, he was pretty calm, silent until it got close to race day. And so we're kind of seeing the same thing with him that way.
Right.
But for the most part, yeah, it's just nice to have Dallas back. I mean, I'm pretty biased. I worked for Dallas and Mitch both, so it's always nice to have one of them in the race. I'm still bummed that Mitch is not running this year, but he keeps saying that it's not permanent, so I'll go with that. I do want to point out that the dogs that are from Mitch's team on Dallas's team, they came in second last year. So, I mean, it's going to be a really strong team. It'll just be really interesting to see how his strategy plays out and what his actual goals are. I'm sure his main goal is to win, but it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, especially with how it plays out with Allie and some of the others.
Alex, this time last year when we were on the show a year ago tonight, the world was a much different place than it is right now. There was all the hoopla, all the partying, all of the nervous jitters, all of the hanging out with friends at the ceremonial and the restart and all of that as we moved down the trail. And about halfway through, COVID really smacked everybody in the face. And I remember you and I speculating about what's going to happen. And, is this the end of Iditarod for this year, meaning last race? And what are they going to do this year? I think COVID is still a huge, compelling story. What are your thoughts about that as we get ready to kick off tomorrow?
Oh, it's definitely made such a difference. And, to the point where I've heard a lot of people speculating about whether it makes sense to hold the race at all. I think that the COVID protocols that Iditarod put out are good, and I'm hoping that they're good enough that we don't need luck for things to go smoothly. Obviously there's always something that can slip through the cracks. So my hope is always that the people who are in charge know more than I do, and that they are acting in good faith and moving forward to try to do everything that they can. So I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to stick with that thought. And even though I have some questions and I have some concerns, I believe that the people who are on the ground implementing this have more awareness and more knowledge than I do.
Let's stick with that for just one more second, Alex. A few weeks ago, you spoke to Rob Urbach, who is the CEO of Iditarod. He's the head man in charge, as you said. The people that are in charge are making the rules. I know that you and he talked about that. And did you guys address it all on the conversations that they had with folks in the villages? And I say that because I just read an article, I think it was yesterday or the day before, that a lot of these villages are really still locked down. And I wonder how that's going to play out, because a lot of people still have to fly in and out, whether it's on airplanes or whatever. So there's still be some activity around villages. But I wonder what they did to calm the fears of all the folks and all these people along the trail. Did you guys talk about that at all?
We touched on it a little bit, but we didn't go into a lot of detail on it. And I believe what is the case is that in a perfect world, there's going to be enough separation that the volunteers and the people who are coming in and out will not have direct contact with the villagers. Obviously, that's that's going to be difficult to really enforce. There's always places where, kids want to come and watch, or fans want to, fans who are living in the villages want to see the people coming through. So I don't know that it will be realistically possible over the course of more than 800 miles to make sure that there's no contact whatsoever. But I think that there's a real strong will on both the Iditarod side and the people in the villages to minimize that contact, so that, these villages, in a lot of cases, some of them have small medical clinics, but most of these, if someone gets sick and it's a serious illness, they're going to have to be medevaced, usually to Anchorage or sometimes to Fairbanks. And obviously that's something that, if you have an outbreak in a village that has 50 or 100 people in it, that's a very, very serious thing, possibly even more serious than if you had an outbreak in a large city and a bunch of people got sick, because at least the infrastructure is already there in the city.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that develops. Our next thing is one of the most exciting parts of this show, and I know that Tony may have some reservations about it, and I know Alex always really enjoys doing this, and we may hear one particular name that we've heard for the last 10 years on this list, and that is our predictions. So I want to do this a little bit different, Alex. I want to do only our top three, and who do you think will be the Rookie of the Year? I know that that's a huge honor to I think you said 12 rookies this year. So who is your top three this year? I'm going to have you go first, Tony second, and then I'll pull up the rear here.
All right. Well, this is difficult because I'd actually prepared to answer the top five.
Okay.
But I will on the fly cut it down to three. And I'm going to say that the top three, and I'm not specifying the order here, are going to be Allie Zirkle, Jesse Royer, and Jor Olsen.
Wow. Okay. And your Rookie of the Year?
And I think my Rookie of the Year choice is going to be Dakota Schlossler.
All right. Yep. Very good. Okay. We have some very interesting picks there. Of course, we did hear that name that we've heard for the last 10 years with Allie Zirkle. That's definitely Alex's pick every year. Tony, who are your top three and your Rookie of the Year?
Well, let's preface this by saying I have a tendency to jinx whoever I choose publicly, so
okay.
I apologize now to the team. I definitely think that Jesse Royer is probably a really, really solid bet this year. She's just been phenomenal the last few years, and I really expect her to be right up there. I'll go with Dallas. I feel like that's another safe bet. And I want to say Allie, but I don't want to jinx her. So I'll go with Nick Petit just because I feel like with the shorter length, his team might stick with the front runners. And I don't want to just say the same three names that Alex said. For Rookie of the Year, I definitely agree with Alex. I think Dakota's probably my number one choice for Rookie of the Year. Maybe Brenda Mackey, but Dakota, I just feel like that's probably the safe bet.
All right, very good. And it's interesting how we all think here. My top choices, my top three, and one of these is thinking about what Tony had said at the earlier part of the show about the Yukon Quest mushers doing very well, especially with those both up and down, up the mountains and then back down. So my top three are Matt Faler, Dallas Seavey and Brent Sass for top 3. And I know Brent has been a little bit quieter than he usually is during the off season. I know he had a pretty nasty collarbone injury a few months ago, but he's always up there, especially with this mountain running and how he does in the Quest. So I think he's going to do very well there. And my rookie of the year, both of you guys said Dakota. I am going to say Brenda Mackey, and I say that for a couple of reasons. Number one, I believe about a third, maybe even a half now of our dogs in our kennel are from her kennel. So she and I are pretty good friends on that side of it. But secondly, if you guys follow that kennel on any of the mid-distance races, they always do excellent. They're always in that top 5, whether it's Brenda or her husband, Will. They are right up there, and I think that she's going to do very well with that as well. So I think that that's going to be interesting. And secondly, I say that, or maybe it's thirdly, I don't know. But thirdly, I say that because I got a notification today, Alex. You'll find this pretty interesting. The number 1 search on dogworksradio.com is Brenda Mackey, and the Google search term, I sent this to her earlier this morning, the Google search term that populates our page is "How old is Brenda Mackey?" which is a very interesting search term on Google. I think that that people are rooting for her, and she's not a no name. She has a very a long pedigree there with her Uncle Lance, and of course her dad and his brother and all that. It goes way back there. So that's going to be interesting as well. Alex, we're way over, but I knew we were going to be. What else do you have on tap before we lay out what we're going to do for the next couple of weeks?
That is all I have for right now. I'm very excited about the race. Oh, sorry, I'm an idiot. Tony and I are hosting a watch party for the start tomorrow.
And how do you find that? Is it Facebook Live? I don't think I've ever been to a watch party. So what is that, and how do people join in?
So it's going to be on Tony's Facebook page, and we'll post links to it on both Facebook and Twitter. I guess tomorrow.
Okay, we'll do that. And I know Tony gave a shout out earlier to the Ugly Dogs. If you are not on Twitter and you are listening to this show, I highly, highly recommend that you head over and either, number one, start an account or have a fake account or something to check out the Twitter feed pretty much starting right now. And if you just type in the hashtag Ugly Dogs, you're going to get more than your fill of tweets back and forth about what's happening on Iditarod, which is interesting because the people that are sort of embraced by the Ugly Dogs, and we're thinking about Blair and Quince, neither one of them are in this year's race. And Quince was one of those folks that is on that withdrawal list. Any other news about the Ugly Dogs, Alex?
I just saw literally about 10 minutes ago that Quince and Blair have a book coming out about their dogs. I think it's called something like A Year in the Life.
Yep.
So that's going to be out in, I think, later this year, maybe in the fall, and that's very exciting.
Excellent. All right, Alex, to end the show tonight, can you lay out our format? I'm sure most people that are listening have listened before. Like we said at the top, this is our 10th year doing this. It's going to be very interesting this year at our 10th year at this. What do you think? What's the layout for the next couple of weeks? Is it going to be different at all, or are we going to do the same things that we normally do?
I think we're going to do the same things we normally do, which is it's basically we have we talk about all of the news stories that have happened since we have been on the air last, and then we often we'll talk about one topic related to the race or related to something that's going on, And then we had a musher profile segment where we talk about one of the mushers in a little bit more depth. And generally, not always, but generally, it tends to be we tend to cover a lot of rookies and a lot of the middle and back of the pack people.
And just to add a couple of things to that, we will be on every night, and you can find us wherever you're listening to your podcast. But here in the Mat-Su Valley, we're also on KVRF 89.7, and we're all over the place on social media. So we will be on every night. Be sure to subscribe, then you'll get a notification as soon as it drops. But one other thing about those musher profiles, tomorrow we're going to start that with Matt Faler, one of my top three there. He's a trail neighbor. He runs on the same trails I do. And I'm glad that we have Tony on for this, because I read a couple of weeks ago that Matt Faler is the one that all the ladies swoon over. Is that right?
He's one of them, yeah, I guess.
What is special about Matt compared to all of the other grizzled mushers out there?
Well, he's not very grizzled. No. I don't know. His personality is just one that I think captures a lot of fans in general. He's just a happy, guy that seems to really care about the dogs and enjoys racing and does really well. I mean, he's the Custom champion, and that's no small feat. That's a really competitive race out there. So, I don't know. He's cute. That's what I think. He's cute, and there are a lot of other fans out there who agree. So, I don't know. I can't speak for everybody.
So it sounds like he is the Tom Brady of the Iditarod in terms of that photogenic appeal.
Oh,
I'm not sure.
Don't insult Matt like that. No.
Very good.
He's likable. Starter.
Okay. So, Alex, one final thing in terms of our format. It has been every year that we go all the way through the banquet. I don't know, at least I don't know right now if they're doing a banquet or not, but our intention, as it is every year, is we'll be on until the Red Lantern finishes, whoever that is and whenever that's finishing. But last question, I promise to you, Alex, is it's about 100 miles shorter. Do you have any idea, just kind of back of the napkin type calculations on when they will finish this race this year, being at 100 miles shorter than normal?
I've thought about this a lot, and I think that it probably, because it's a little bit more strenuous, perhaps, with going back and forth on the Alaska range, I think that my guess is that we're looking at a race that is approximately the same time as usual, maybe a few hours shorter, but I don't think we're looking at, a full day shorter.
Wow, that's interesting that you say that, and I heard Tony affirming that as well. We typically finish, I believe it's on Tuesday morning, so about a week and 3 days-ish from when we're on right now. I'm anticipating Sunday night, early Monday morning, being that it's about 100 miles shorter. I could be totally wrong. I'm just thinking about that 100 miles shorter and how long it takes to run that on a dog team. It will be interesting to see what we come up with, but I think we're in for an exciting race. It's going to be interesting to see what stories develop, especially with the lack of media that's going to be allowed on the trail this year. I know you and I talked a little bit about that, Alex, beforehand, and I'm excited to have Tony on for a few of these shows. I know that she said that she could be on the weekend, so maybe we'll have her on for 4 of our shows. That's going to be exciting as well. So lastly, Alex, how can people follow you during the race? And then Tony, and then we'll end with me and we'll close the show.
Okay, so the easiest way is to find me on Twitter at Coldfoot Films, and also because we haven't actually plugged this particular thing. Tony has a great blog entry up on her Writer's Block blog where she has gathered the list of all of the Iditarod mushers and with links to all of their social media. So Facebook pages, Twitter pages, I don't know what else, Instagram perhaps. So it's all in one place. It's a great, great resource. I know this is something that Tony does every year, and it's something that I make very good use of every year. So I wanted to put a shout out to Tony for putting that together and let people know about it. They should definitely check it out.
Very good. I'll put a link to that on the show notes page. Tony, how can folks follow you on social media during the race?
The easiest way is probably Twitter. So you just look me up at Tony Shell AK on Twitter. I also have a blog, which is tonyshell.blogspot.com, which is where Alex was mentioning the proof that I have no life, because I'm able to find 47 dog mushers, websites, social media, and basically their entire online footprint, and I've learned way too much about some of them. So yeah, Twitter is the easiest way to find me.
So as I mentioned with the Ugly Dogs folks over there, hashtag Ugly Dogs, Twitter is the place. I know Facebook is for all of us old timers. That's where we spend all of our time. But Twitter is where it's happening during Iditarod. And if you really want to have some really interesting conversations that go on 24 hours a day. I don't know how in the world Alex does it, but I've seen him tweet at 3 o'clock in the morning. He'll be tweeting about what's happening in McGrath. So it's interesting to see these folks on Twitter. You can follow me at Robert Forto. That's Forto, and that same handle anywhere, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, no matter where. And you can follow our show at Dogworks Radio, also on all social media. Alex, we will be back on tomorrow. We don't have a time, but if you hit that subscribe button, you will find us as soon as that show drops. Thank you very much, both of you guys, for being on. It's a pleasure, and I'm glad that we're doing this again for our 10th year. Alex, thank you. Tony, thank you. We'll talk again soon, okay?
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, guys, on behalf of my guests today, or co-hosts as they are, Tony and Alex, this is Robert Forto for Mushing Radio. We will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
From Dogworks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for Dogworks Radio.